After a family gathering, out of the blue, my bank account was empty. My husband so calmly tells me, "We all decided that you didn't need that money." Trembling with rage, I took out my phone and told him, "Well, then you won't need this either." They started to laugh, but just at that moment, there was a loud knock at the door. It opened and the investigators came in. I'm 33 years old, and until recently I thought my marriage to Marco, 35, was good. Not perfect, what relationship is? But we had our apartment, stable jobs, and plans for the future. Of course, there were small signs I ignored, like how he insisted on reviewing expenses together every month, how he questioned any purchase I didn't consult with him about first, or how I always had to justify why I needed something new. "It's for our own good," he'd say, "to save and meet our goals." And I believed him. Everything changed when Dad passed away 3 months ago. It was sudden, a heart attack while he slept. We didn't have time to say goodbye, to settle old arguments, to say all those things we always postpone. The loss devastated me. Dad and I were always close, especially after Mom died when I was 15. He raised me alone, working double shifts, saving for my education, supporting me unconditionally. During the funeral, Marco was by my side, holding my hand, saying all the right words. But now I wonder if he was already calculating then. A week after the burial, Dad's lawyer, Lucia, contacted me to discuss the will. I never imagined Dad had that much money. Apparently, he had invested wisely over the years and had a sizable life insurance policy. "Elena, your father left very specific instructions," Lucia explained in her office. "He wanted you to have financial security. He left you 215,000 pesos for your future." I remember my hands shaking as I held the documents. It was a life-changing amount, one that would give me options I never thought I'd have. "Are you okay?" Lucia asked. "Yes, I just didn't expect this. Your father was a prudent man. He specifically mentioned that this money was for you, for your future and your dreams." When I told Marco that night, his reaction was strange. First surprise, then a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's incredible, love. We can do so many things," he said, suddenly enthusiastic. "We could invest in that business my brother Javier wants to start, or help my parents with their mortgage. Or, Marco," I interrupted him, "this money was left to me by my dad for my future." His expression changed for a second, a shadow that passed so quickly I almost missed it. "Sure, but we're married. What's yours is mine and what's mine is yours, right? Besides, helping family is investing in our future." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable. During the following weeks, the subject of money came up constantly. Marco started inviting his parents, Roberto and Carmen, and his brother Javier, over for dinner more often. The conversations always ended up revolving around the unexpected gift and how we could use it wisely. "My uncle has some land for sale," Javier mentioned one night. "It would be a perfect investment. In a few years it would be worth double. Or you could help us with our mortgage," Carmen suggested. "That way, you'd have more to leave to yourselves in the future." Every time I expressed my discomfort or mentioned that I had other plans for the money, like investing it in a fund for my own business someday, or saving it for emergencies, I felt looks of disapproval. "You're so selfish sometimes," Marco told me one night after his parents left. "You only think about yourself. You don't care about my family. You don't care about our future together." His words hurt me, but something inside me remained firm. This money represented my father's sacrifice and love. It was his last gift to me. In a follow-up meeting with Lucia to finalize some paperwork, I mentioned the pressure I was feeling. "Elena, listen to me carefully," she said, her tone turning serious. "I've seen this many times. People change when there's money involved, even family. Your father wanted this for you, not for his son-in-law or his son-in-law's family. Marco says that in a marriage everything is shared. In theory, yes, but you also have a right to your own assets, especially an inheritance. I would recommend keeping that money in a separate account, in your name only." I followed her advice and opened a new account. When I showed Marco the documents, he exploded. "You don't trust me after 5 years together? Of course I trust you, but this money is special to me. It's the last thing my father gave me. If you trusted me, you wouldn't hide the money in a separate account." Despite the tension, I stuck to my decision. The money was deposited into my new account, and I was the only one with access, or so I thought. What I didn't consider was that Marco knew all my passwords. We had always shared everything. Email accounts, social media passwords, access codes. It was part of that total trust he always preached, although now I see it was another form of control. A week after the deposit, Roberto and Carmen organized a family gathering at their house. To celebrate our good fortune and plan for the future, they said. Something told me I shouldn't go, but Marco insisted so much that I finally gave in. What I didn't know was that that night would change everything. My in-laws' house was unusually tidy that night. Carmen had prepared all my favorite dishes, and Roberto had brought out his collection of expensive wines. Javier was there with his wife Daniela, who gave me an uncomfortable look when I entered. Now I understand why. "Welcome to the family," Carmen exclaimed, hugging me a little too enthusiastically. "Tonight is special." Marco led me to the dining room table, where everyone had glasses of wine poured. Roberto raised his glass for a toast. To new family ventures and to Elena, who is helping us all achieve our dreams. I frowned, confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you mean." The awkward silence that followed should have alerted me. Marco took my hand under the table, squeezing it too tightly. "I was telling them about how we're going to invest in Javier's business," he said with a tense smile, "and how part of the money will help your in-laws with their situation. But we haven't agreed on any of that," I replied, feeling my heart begin to race. "Come on, love, we've been discussing it for weeks," Marco insisted, in that condescending voice he used when he wanted to make me doubt my own memory. "We said we would invest in the family." "No, Marco, we've discussed it, yes, but I never agreed. That money is mine from my father." Roberto cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, it's done anyway. The papers were signed yesterday." "What papers?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The ones for the transfer for Javier's premises and the down payment for our mortgage," Carmen explained as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Marco helped us with everything." My mind started to spin. Instinctively, I took out my phone and opened the banking app. My account showed a balance of 0 pesos. All the transactions had been made in the last 24 hours. 100,000 pesos transferred to an account in Javier's name, 75,000 pesos to Roberto and Carmen's mortgage account, and 40,000 pesos to an account I didn't recognize. Nausea washed over me. I looked at Marco, unable to believe what I was seeing. "What have you done?" I whispered. Marco shrugged, completely relaxed. "We all decided you didn't need that money. It will be better invested this way." "Decided?" "They decided." My voice rose an octave. "It's my money, my inheritance. My father left it to me." "Elena, calm down," Roberto intervened. "This benefits everyone, including you." "You're being too dramatic," Carmen added. "It's what families do, Cher." I felt like I was drowning. My whole body was shaking with rage and disbelief. 5 years of marriage, and Marco had violated my trust in the most despicable way possible. "How could you?" I said to Marco, my voice breaking. "How could you steal from me?" "It's not stealing when it's between spouses," he replied brazenly. "Legally, what's yours is mine." It was then that I noticed the open WhatsApp messages on Javier's phone, which was on the table. I managed to read. "Everything is ready. Elena doesn't suspect anything. The money is already in the accounts." Suddenly, I remembered something Lucia had told me in our last meeting. "If at any time you feel that something is not right, contact me immediately. Misappropriation of funds is a crime, even between spouses." My hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold the phone, but I managed to open my email. There they were, the bank statements, the screenshots I had taken as a precaution, the scanned will, everything. I just needed to send it. As I typed frantically, Marco tried to take my phone away. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone changing from confident to nervous. I looked him straight in the eye as I pressed send. "Well, then you won't need this either," I said, showing him the screen with the email sent to Lucia with all the evidence. Marco ran nervously, looking at his family. "And what is that supposed to mean?" They all started to laugh, an uncomfortable laughter that filled the room. Javier even had the audacity to make a toast to the united family and prosperous business. But their celebration was short-lived. Exactly 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang insistently. Roberto went to open it, probably expecting some late neighbor or friend. Instead, 3 people in formal suits entered the room. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, showing identification. "Good evening. I'm Investigator Ramirez from the Department of Financial Crimes. These are my colleagues, Agents Morales and Suarez. We are here for a complaint of bank fraud and misappropriation of funds." The color drained from Marco's face. Roberto dropped his wine glass, staining the white carpet that Carmen treasured so much. Javier tried to hide his phone, but Agent Suarez was quicker. "We're going to need to see that device, sir." Investigator Ramirez addressed me, her tone professional but kind. "Mrs. Elena Martinez, we received an email with evidence of possible bank fraud. Your lawyer, Mrs. Lucia Vega, contacted us urgently. Could you confirm if you authorized the transfers made today from your personal account?" "No," I replied, my voice finding its strength. "I did not authorize any transfers. My husband stole my password and transferred the money without my consent." Marco tried to interrupt. "That's ridiculous. We're married. We share everything." Investigator Ramirez looked at him coldly. "Sir, I suggest you remain silent. Marriage does not give you the right to appropriate personal funds without consent, especially when it comes to an inheritance specifically documented in your wife's name." She turned to the family. "We need you all to come with us to the police station to take statements. In the meantime, we have initiated the process to freeze the accounts where the money was transferred." Carmen started to cry. "But we need that money for our mortgage." "You should have thought about that before participating in bank fraud, ma'am," Agent Morales replied impassively. As we left, Marco tried to approach me, his face a mixture of fear and rage. "How could you do this to your own family?" I looked at him, feeling a strange calmness replace the anger. "You are not my family, Marco. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't betray." Outside, Lucia was waiting for me in her car. I ran to her and collapsed in tears as the investigators escorted Marco and the others to their official vehicles. "Everything will be all right," Lucia assured me, hugging me. "The evidence is overwhelming. We'll get your money back." As we drove away, I saw Marco being put into the police car. Our eyes met one last time. In his eyes there was no remorse, only surprise. He never expected me to have the strength to confront him, but my father had taught me well. Never let anyone take away what is rightfully yours. Never. The following hours passed like a blur. The interrogation room was cold and austere, exactly as they show them on TV. They took my statement for almost 3 hours, asking me every detail. When did I receive the inheritance? How did Marco behave afterward? Who had access to my accounts? Had verbal authorization been given for the transfers? "No," I repeated over and over. "I never authorized anyone to touch that money. In fact, I was very clear with all of them that I didn't want to share it." Investigator Ramirez typed as I spoke, nodding occasionally. "What they have done is a federal crime," she explained when I finished my statement. "Bank fraud, misappropriation of funds, and we could even talk about identity theft, since your husband used your credentials to access your account. What will happen now?" I asked, exhausted. "We have frozen all the accounts where the money was transferred. Your lawyer has already initiated the process to recover it. As for your husband and his family, they face serious charges. Depending on how the case proceeds, they could face substantial fines and even prison time." Lucia was waiting for me outside. She took me to a nearby hotel, insisting that I shouldn't return to the apartment I shared with Marco. "Tomorrow we'll start the divorce proceedings," she said. "And we'll request a restraining order. I don't want him near you when he's released on bail." I spent the night alternating between tears of rage and periods of strange calm. My marriage was over, my trust was shattered, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of Marco's manipulations. The next morning my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages and calls from Carmen, Javier, even mutual friends who had already found out. I ignored them all except for one, a message from Daniela, Javier's wife. "Elena, I'm so sorry about what happened. I didn't know the details until last night. Javier only told me that the family was going to receive financial help from you. He never mentioned that it was without your consent. They've been planning this since they learned about the inheritance. They have messages from weeks ago. I have screenshots if you need them for your case. I replied, thanking her for her honesty and suggesting she speak to Investigator Ramirez. An hour later, I received a call from the investigator herself. Mrs. Martinez, Javier Mendoza's wife, has provided us with additional evidence. WhatsApp conversations where your husband and his family discussed how to access your account and transfer the money without your knowledge. This considerably strengthens our case. 3 days later, I attended the preliminary hearing. Marco, Roberto, Carmen, and Javier were sitting together, all with different lawyers. Marco seemed to have aged years in just a few days. When our eyes met, he attempted a conciliatory smile, which I completely ignored. The judge was implacable upon hearing the details of the case. The evidence presented is conclusive, he declared. We have bank records, IP addresses confirming from where the transfers were made, testimonies, and explicit conversations where the defendants planned to appropriate the money without Mrs. Martinez's consent. Marco tried to argue that as her husband, he had the right to access my accounts, but the judge interrupted him. Mr. Mendoza, marriage is not a license to steal. Inheritance is separate property, not marital property, and your wife had clearly expressed that she did not wish to share it. What you did was a crime, not a family decision. I left the court with a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, the relief that justice was on my side. On the other, the sadness of seeing the person with whom I shared 5 years of my life facing such serious consequences for his own greed. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal procedures. The divorce proceeded quickly, given the circumstances. Marco tried to negotiate, offering to return his share of the money if I dropped the charges. It's all or nothing, I replied through Lucia. And the charges stand. For months after the incident, I received the notification. The judge had ordered the full return of my inheritance, plus interest and compensation for damages. The accounts of Marco and his family remained frozen, and the criminal trial was progressing. Roberto and Carmen lost their house, unable to pay the mortgage. Javier's promising business never existed. It was just an excuse to keep my money. And Marco, my ex-husband, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for bank fraud and misappropriation of funds. His family received lesser but still significant sentences: probation, community service, and fines that would take years to pay. When it was all over, I moved to another city, bought a small apartment, and opened the graphic design business I had always dreamed of. Part of my father's inheritance was finally being used as he would have wanted, for my future, for my dreams. One afternoon, almost a year later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. Elena, I don't expect your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. Prison has given me time to reflect on the kind of person I became. Greed blinded me, and the worst part is that I hurt the only person who truly loved me sincerely. I'm not asking you to reply. I just wanted you to know that I understand the damage I caused, and I deeply regret it. Marco. I put the letter in a drawer and went on with my day. Maybe someday I would find the space to forgive. Not for him but for my own peace. But for now I was focused on rebuilding my life one decision at a time. That night, as I closed my shop, I thought of my father. He always said that difficulties reveal the true nature of people. He was right. Marco's betrayal revealed his true character, but it also revealed my own strength. As I walked towards my new home, I smiled at the starry sky. Thank you, Dad, I whispered, for protecting me even when you were no longer here. The most valuable lesson I learned wasn't about money, but about the importance of trusting my instincts and defending what is rightfully mine. No one has the power to decide for me, and anyone who tries to take away my autonomy will discover, as Marco and his family did, that the consequences can be devastating. My bank account is no longer empty, neither is my life.